You can be surrounded by people who love you and still feel like you're starving. That's the part nobody warns you about. You can have a partner who says the words, a family who shows up, friends who drop everything for you. And somewhere underneath all of it, there's this quiet, persistent ache that whispers the same thing every night. None of them actually see me. And you can't figure out why. Because the love is right there. You can point to it. You can list the evidence. And yet, it never quite reaches the place inside you that's cold. Carl Jung understood exactly why this happens, and his answer is going to be uncomfortable because it doesn't let you blame the people around you. He discovered that the reason love so often fails to land isn't that people aren't giving it. It's that there's a pane of glass between you and everyone who tries to reach you. A barrier so clear and so old that you've forgotten it's there. They reach for you, you reach back. And it feels, to both of you, like your hands are touching, but they never quite do. There's always that thin, invisible surface neither of you can see, and everything meant for you slides right off it. Jung spent his life studying why human beings, who want love more than almost anything, keep making themselves impossible to love. And what he found runs against everything the culture tells you. You've been sold the idea that love is a matter of finding the right person, that somewhere out there is someone who will finally understand you, finally see through to the real you, and when they arrive, the ache will stop. Jung would tell you that's a beautiful fantasy that keeps millions of people lonely their entire lives, because the person you're waiting for can't reach you, not because they don't want to, because you've made yourself unreachable, and you don't even know you've done it. Today I want to walk you through what Jung discovered about the one thing you have to learn before anyone can truly love you. Why the glass exists, how you built it without meaning to, what it's actually protecting, and why the very thing you've been doing to earn love is the thing that guarantees you'll never quite feel it. This isn't going to be the comfortable version, but if you've spent years feeling unseen by people who swear they love you, there's a good chance you're about to understand something that will reorganize how you think about every relationship you've ever had. Let's start with the glass, because you need to understand what it's made of. Jung called the outermost layer of a person the persona. It's the face you present to the world, the version of yourself you've decided is acceptable, presentable, safe to show. And here's what most people never realize. The persona isn't a lie you tell on purpose. You didn't sit down one day and decide to construct a false self. It was built for you, piece by piece, starting so early that you have no memory of a time before it. Think about how it forms. You're a small child, and you're doing what children do, feeling everything, showing everything, wanting everything openly. And then you start to notice. You notice that certain things you do make the big people in your life light up, lean in, offer warmth. And certain other things make them tense, pull back, go quiet, or worse. You're a survival machine at that age, tuned to one frequency, what keeps the love coming. So you start to adjust. You show more of what earns the warmth and less of what earns the withdrawal. You do this thousands of times before you can even form a complete sentence. And slowly, without anyone deciding it, a shape forms. A version of you that's optimized for approval. The child who learned that being cheerful kept the peace becomes the adult who can't stop performing happiness even when they're breaking. The child who learned that needing things made their parent anxious becomes the adult who prides themselves on never needing anyone. The child who learned that their anger frightened people becomes the adult who's warm and agreeable and secretly full of a rage they can't even locate. The persona is the accumulated strategy of a lifetime spent figuring out which parts of you were welcome. Now here's where it turns tragic. The persona works. That's the cruel part. It does exactly what it was built to do. It earns you approval, acceptance, praise, relationships, all the outward signs of being loved. People are drawn to your persona. They compliment it. They build their idea of you around it. They tell you they love you, and they mean it. They love what they can see, and what they can see is the persona. The mask is getting all the love, and you, the person behind the mask, are standing in the dark, watching your own understudy take a bow every single night, wondering why the applause feels like it's happening to someone else. That's the glass. The persona is the glass. And you built it out of love, or rather out of the hunger for it, which is why it's so hard to see and so hard to bring down. It's not a wall you resent. It's the thing that got you this far. It's the reason you have relationships at all. So when someone tells you the way to be loved is to lower your defenses and be your real self, part of you panics, because your real self is exactly what you learned decades ago would not be tolerated. The persona isn't protecting you from strangers. It's protecting you from the abandonment you're certain would come if anyone saw underneath. Jung watched this pattern in patient after patient. People who had everything the persona could earn and still felt utterly alone. And he came to understand something that most people never grasp. When you're operating entirely through the persona, every piece of love that comes toward you gets addressed to the mask. It arrives for the performance, not the performer. So even as it pours in, you don't receive it, because on some level, you know it's not for you. It's for the version of you that you've been showing them. And you can't feel loved for who you are when who you are has never actually been in the room. This is why the ache doesn't go away no matter how much love surrounds you. You could be adored by 10,000 people and still starve, if all 10,000 of them are adoring your persona. The quantity was never the problem. The address was wrong. The love keeps getting delivered to a self you invented, and the self you actually are never gets the mail. And I want you to sit with how disorienting that is, because it creates a very specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of being loved for the wrong reasons. It's almost worse than not being loved at all, because you can't complain about it. What would you even say? They love me, and it makes me feel unseen? People would think you were ungrateful or impossible to please, so you keep it inside. You add it to the pile of things you can't show, and the glass gets a little thicker. Now, Jung didn't stop at the persona, because the persona alone doesn't explain the whole tragedy. The persona is only half of it. To understand why love fails to reach you, you have to understand what's on the other side of the glass, what you're actually hiding. And this is where his idea of the shadow comes in, and where the story gets much more honest. Everything you decided all those years ago was unacceptable about you didn't disappear. It couldn't. You can't delete a part of yourself. You can only banish it from view. So all the qualities the persona had to exclude, the anger, the need, the selfishness, the envy, the parts of you that were too much or too dark or too hungry, got pushed down into the basement of your psyche. Jung called that basement the shadow. It's not evil. It's just everything about you that didn't make the cut for the version you show the world. And here's the thing you have to understand about the shadow and love. You believe on the deepest level that the shadow is the reason you're unlovable. You believe that if anyone ever saw the parts of you locked in that basement, they'd recoil, they'd leave, they'd confirm the thing you feared your whole life, that the real you, the whole you, is too much or not enough or fundamentally wrong. So you guard the shadow with everything you have. You keep the light on in the window to signal that you want to be found, but you've triple locked the door to the one room where the real you actually lives. Do you see the bind? You want to be loved for who you are, but who you are includes the shadow, and you're convinced the shadow makes you unlovable. So you show people the persona, they love the persona, and then you feel unloved because they don't know the real you. But you're the one who's kept the real you hidden. You've made being seen impossible, and then grieved that no one sees you. This is the trap Jung watched people live inside for entire lifetimes, most of them never once realizing they were both the prisoner and the one holding the key. And it goes deeper, because the shadow doesn't stay quietly in the basement. It leaks. It has to. Everything you refuse to face in yourself finds a way out sideways. And Jung had a word for the most important way this happens in relationships. He called it projection. And projection is the second great reason no one can truly love you until you learn this. Because projection isn't just how your shadow escapes, it's how you accidentally destroy the very love you're trying so hard to hold on to. Here's how projection works. The parts of yourself you can't accept don't just sit in the dark. They get cast outward, like a film projected onto a screen. And the screen is usually the person closest to you. If you've buried your own anger, you'll become exquisitely sensitive to anger in your partner. You'll see it where it isn't, react to it out of all proportion, feel attacked by a tone of voice that no one else would even notice. If you've disowned your own neediness, you'll find your partner's normal desire for closeness suffocating, smothering, too much. You're not reacting to them. You're reacting to the parts of yourself you exiled, now wearing their face. This is why so many relationships turn into two people fighting ghosts. You're not arguing with your partner. You're arguing with the disowned pieces of yourself that you've painted onto them. And they're doing the same thing to you. Two people, each projecting their private shadow onto the other, each convinced the problem is the person across the room, when the real conflict is happening entirely inside each of them. Jung watched couples destroy each other this way for years, both of them certain they were the reasonable one, both of them fighting a war that had almost nothing to do with the person actually in front of them. But projection cuts even deeper than conflict, and this is the part that changes how you'll understand your own desire. Jung discovered that we don't only project the parts of ourselves we hate, we also project the parts of ourselves we've never lived. The unrealized potential, the buried dreams, the qualities we abandoned along the way to becoming acceptable, all of that gets projected too. And when we find it glowing in another person, we call it love. We fall for someone and feel like we finally found the one who completes us. And what's actually happening, more often than we'd like to admit, is that we're seeing our own unlived self reflected back, and mistaking the reflection for the person. He called the deepest version of this the anima and the animus, the inner image of the opposite, the unlived masculine or feminine within us that we cast onto a real human being and then fall in love with. And the reason this matters so much is that when you love someone through projection, you're not actually loving them. You're loving your own image, hung on their body like a coat on a hanger. And sooner or later, usually a couple of years in, the real person underneath starts to show through the projection. They do something the image would never do. They disappoint the fantasy, and you feel betrayed, cheated, like they changed, like they tricked you into loving someone who doesn't exist, when the truth is that they were always themselves, and you were in love with a picture. Sit with what this means for a moment, because it's the hinge of everything Jung understood about love. If you haven't met your own shadow, if you haven't reclaimed your own unlived self, then you're carrying all of that around unconsciously, and you have no choice but to fling it onto whoever you get close to. You'll turn your partner into a screen for your disowned darkness and a screen for your unlived light, and in both cases, you'll be relating to a projection, not a person. Which means you literally cannot see them. And if you can't see them, you can't love them. Not really. Not the actual them. And a relationship where neither person can truly see the other is two people loving their own reflections in the dark, wondering why they feel so alone in a room that's supposedly full. This is the moment where it lands, if it's going to land at all. The reason no one can truly love you isn't only that you've hidden yourself behind glass, it's that you've never fully met yourself, so you can't offer a real self to be loved. and you can't see the real person offering love back. You're loving projections and being loved as a projection. Two masks, two screens, no actual contact. The glass isn't just between you and them. The glass is between you and you. And that's the thing Jung says you have to learn. Not a technique for making people love you better. Not a set of rules for communication. Something much harder and much simpler. You have to learn to meet yourself, the whole of yourself, the persona and the shadow, the parts you show and the parts you've spent your life hiding. And you have to learn to stop needing to hide them. Because only when there's a whole, integrated person standing in the room can that person be seen. And only what can be seen can be loved. If something in you has been aching as you listen to this, if you've been recognizing yourself in the glass, in the mask that gets all the love while you stand in the dark, then the work of actually meeting yourself is where everything turns. We put together a guide for exactly this kind of turning, called True Self-Discovery. 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's teachings, built to help you find the door to the room you've kept locked and to look honestly at what's been living there. Not to fix you, to introduce you to yourself. If that's where you are right now, the link is below. Because here's what happens when you don't do this work, and I want to be honest about it, because the cost is real, and most people pay it without ever knowing they had a choice. You spend your whole life optimizing the persona. You get better and better at the performance. You attract more love, more approval, more praise. All of it aimed at the mask, all of it sliding off the glass. And the gap between how loved you look and how loved you feel keeps widening, until one day you're sitting in a life that any outside observer would call full, and you feel like a stranger in it. You've been so successful at being who you needed to be that you've lost all contact with who you are. And the loneliest thing in the world is to be surrounded by people who love a person you stopped being decades ago. Jung saw this most often in people in the second half of life. They'd done everything right by the persona's rules, built the career, the marriage, the reputation, and somewhere around 40 or 50, the whole structure started to feel hollow, and they couldn't understand why, because nothing was technically wrong. What was wrong was that they'd never lived as themselves. They'd lived as their persona, and the persona had gotten everything, and none of it belonged to the real person underneath, who'd been waiting in the dark this whole time, growing quieter and quieter, wondering if it would ever get to come out. So how do you actually learn this thing? How do you meet yourself and stop hiding? Jung didn't offer a quick method because there isn't one, but he did map the terrain, and I want to walk you through what the process actually looks like, because it's not what most people imagine. It starts, unglamorously, with noticing the glass. Most people don't even know it's there. They think the way they feel, unseen, unmet, vaguely lonely inside their relationships, is just the way life is. The first shift is realizing that the barrier is real, and that you built it, and that it's made of everything you've been afraid to show. You start to catch yourself performing. You notice the little adjustments you make, the way you become slightly different for different people, the way you edit yourself in real time to stay acceptable. You start to feel the difference between the moments you're being yourself and the moments you're running the persona. And once you can feel that difference, you can't unfeel it. It's the beginning of everything. Then comes the harder part, turning toward the shadow. This is the room you've kept locked, and Jung was unflinching about how much courage it takes to open it, because what's inside isn't pretty by the persona's standards. You have to be willing to look at your own capacity for the things you've judged in others, your envy, your cruelty, your neediness, your rage, the selfish, hungry, unacceptable parts you decided long ago were too dangerous to own. And you have to do something that feels almost impossible at first. You have to stop treating them as enemies and start treating them as parts of yourself that had reasons for existing. Because here's what Jung understood that changes the whole relationship with the shadow. Those exiled parts aren't the garbage of your personality. They're the disowned life force. Your anger is your capacity to protect yourself and set boundaries. Your neediness is your capacity for closeness and connection. Your selfishness, in healthy form, is your capacity to know what you want and pursue it. When you banished these things to save the persona, you didn't get rid of anything worthless. You cut off half your aliveness. And the reason integrating the shadow makes you more lovable, not less, is that a person who's reclaimed their whole self is finally three-dimensional. They have edges, they have depth, they have a real inside. And a person with a real inside is someone you can actually love, because there's finally something solid there to love. The persona, by contrast, is smooth and pleasant and completely flat. There's nothing to hold on to because there's nothing underneath. This is why people can feel affection for someone who lives entirely in their persona, but never quite feel love in the deep sense. There's no there. The integrated person is textured, complicated, real. Harder to deal with in some ways, sure, but possible to love in a way the mask never was. As you turn toward the shadow, something else starts to happen, and this is where projection begins to lift. Every time you reclaim a piece of yourself, you take back a piece of what you'd been flinging onto other people. When you stop needing to disown your own anger, you stop seeing attack everywhere. When you make peace with your own neediness, your partner's desire for closeness stops feeling like a threat. The screen goes dark, one projection at a time, and you start, maybe for the first time, to actually see the person in front of you. Not your image of them, not your shadow wearing their face, them as they actually are. Jung considered this the real work of love, and it's almost never talked about. Loving someone isn't primarily about feeling, it's about seeing. It's the slow, humbling process of withdrawing your projections until the other person comes into focus as a separate human being, with their own inner world that has nothing to do with your fantasies or your fears. Most people never do this. They stay in love with their projections and call the inevitable disillusionment falling out of love, when what really happened is that reality finally became too loud to ignore. To truly love someone, you have to let them be real. And you can only let them be real to the degree that you've stopped needing them to carry the parts of yourself you won't hold. This is the great secret hidden inside Jung's whole vision of love, and it's why he insisted that the relationship with yourself has to come first. Every capacity you have to love another person is limited by how much of yourself you can face. The parts of you that you can't accept become the parts of your partner you can't accept. The love you can't give yourself becomes the love you can't fully receive from anyone. You will only ever be able to be loved to the exact depth that you've been willing to meet yourself, not 1 inch further. The glass between you and everyone is made of the same material as the glass between you and your own reflection, and when one comes down, so does the other. Which brings us to the thing you have to learn, stated as plainly as I can put it. You have to learn to be known. And to be known, you first have to be willing to know yourself, all of yourself, and to stop treating the truth of who you are as something that has to be hidden to be tolerated. You have to bring the real you into the room, persona and shadow, light and dark, the parts that earn approval and the parts you're certain would earn rejection. You have to let yourself be seen whole, because a partial self, no matter how loved, will always feel unloved, since the love never reaches the parts kept in the dark. And a whole self, even when it's harder to love, can actually feel it when the love arrives, because there's finally someone home to receive it. Now I have to be honest with you about the cost, because Jung never pretended this was easy, and I won't either. When you start bringing the real self into your relationships, things get harder before they get better. Some people in your life fell in love with your persona, and they will not be happy when you stop performing it. The friend who valued you for always being agreeable will feel betrayed when you start disagreeing. The partner who relied on you never needing anything will feel destabilized when you start having needs. The people who built their relationship with you on the mask will experience your realness as a kind of loss, and some of them will pull away. This is real, and it hurts, and you should know it's coming. But Jung would tell you something about this that reframes the whole loss. The relationships that can't survive your realness were never relationships with you. They were relationships with your performance. And as painful as it is to watch them fall away, what you're actually discovering is which of the love in your life was ever addressed to the real you at all. Some of it wasn't. That's hard. But it's better to know. Because the alternative is to keep performing forever, keeping everyone, and never once being loved for who you actually are. A smaller number of real connections will nourish you more than a crowd of people who love your mask. And here's the quieter truth underneath all of this. When you start to show the real self and someone stays, when you let them see a part of you that you were certain would send them running, and they don't run, they lean in. Something happens that the persona could never give you. For the first time, the love reaches through the glass. It arrives at the actual you. And it's overwhelming, because you've spent your whole life braced for rejection at the exact moment you're finally being received. People often cry the first time they feel genuinely seen and not abandoned, because their whole nervous system was prepared for the opposite. The relief of it. The strange, almost unbearable relief of being known and not left. That's what you've been aching for this whole time. Not more love aimed at the mask. That single experience of being seen underneath it and staying wanted anyway. And you can't get there without taking the risk of showing what you've hidden. There's no path to being truly loved that doesn't run directly through the terrifying act of letting yourself be truly seen. The glass doesn't dissolve on its own. You have to be the one to tap on it from the inside and let someone find you there. I want to slow down here and speak to you directly, because I know this is a lot, and I know how it feels to hear it if you're the one behind the glass. You might be thinking that all of this is fine in theory, but that your situation is different, that the parts of you you've hidden really are too much, that if people saw the real you, they really would leave, that you're the exception. Jung heard this from nearly everyone he worked with, and what he found, over and over, was that the shadow is almost never as monstrous as the person hiding it believes. The things you're most ashamed of, the parts you're most certain are unlovable, are usually just ordinary human parts that you were taught, very early and very convincingly, to be ashamed of. The rage isn't demonic. It's the anger of a child who wasn't allowed to have any. The neediness isn't pathetic. It's the unmet longing of someone who learned that needing led to disappointment. These parts aren't ugly. They're wounded. And wounds don't need to be hidden. They need to be tended. The reason this matters is that most of the terror around being seen is based on a false estimate. You're guarding the door as if there's a monster behind it, when what's actually behind it is a frightened, exiled part of yourself that has been waiting your entire life for you to come back for it. When you finally do, when you open the door and find not a monster, but a version of yourself you abandoned to survive, the relationship with that part changes everything. You stop being at war with yourself, and a person who stopped fighting themselves has a kind of peace that other people can feel across a room. That peace is magnetic. It's the ground on which real intimacy becomes possible, because you're no longer using all your energy to hold the door shut. There's a stillness that comes over people who've done this work, and Jung noticed it. They stop performing, and it's palpable. They can sit with you and just be there, without managing your impression of them, without editing, without the low hum of anxiety that runs underneath the persona. And being around a person like that is a relief you didn't know you were missing, because so much of ordinary human interaction is two personas negotiating with each other, two panes of glass tapping politely and never touching. When you meet someone who's actually there, actually present in their own skin, you feel it immediately, and you want more of it. That's what it looks like to be lovable in the deepest sense, not perfect, not polished, but present, available, real. If you've been sitting with the recognition that you've spent years behind that glass, performing love, receiving love that never quite lands, aching to be seen and terrified of it in the same breath, then the reflection work in true self-discovery was built for exactly this threshold. 24 exercises rooted in Jung's approach, designed to walk you back toward the rooms you've locked and the parts of yourself you exiled to stay acceptable. It won't do the meeting for you, but it'll help you find your way to the door. The link is right below if that's what you need right now. Let me take you a layer deeper now, into something Jung understood about love that almost no one talks about, because it explains why so many people who genuinely want love end up sabotaging it right when it starts to get real. It comes down to what happens when the love finally does reach through the glass. You would think that being truly seen and truly loved would feel like arrival, like coming home, like everything you wanted. And it does, eventually. But the first thing it often triggers is panic. Because the persona was built to keep you safe, and to your nervous system, being seen without the mask registers as danger. Deep, old danger. The exact danger the persona was constructed to prevent. So when someone gets close enough to see the real you, and instead of leaving they stay and want more, some ancient alarm goes off inside you, and you feel an almost overwhelming urge to retreat, to sabotage, to push them away, to put the mask back on. Because being unseen was lonely, but it was familiar. Being seen is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar reads as unsafe. This is why so many people run from the very love they've been longing for. It gets real, it gets close, the glass starts to crack, and instead of relief they feel terror, and they don't understand the terror, so they attribute it to the relationship. Something must be wrong. This doesn't feel right. Maybe they're not the one. When what's actually happening is that intimacy is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, reaching the real you, and the real you has no experience of being reached and doesn't know how to tolerate it. Jung understood that learning to be loved isn't a single decision. It's a capacity you have to build slowly, like a muscle you've never used, and at first it aches to use it at all. So part of learning this thing is learning to stay when the love gets close, to feel the panic and not act on it, to let yourself be seen for a little longer than is comfortable, and then a little longer than that, until your system slowly learns that being seen is not the catastrophe it was braced for. This is why the work can't be rushed. You're not just changing a belief. You're retraining something that got wired into you before you had words, teaching a very old and very frightened part of yourself that it's finally safe to come out of the dark. And that part doesn't trust easily. It shouldn't. It went into hiding for good reasons. It'll only emerge when it's convinced, over and over through experience, that this time it won't be abandoned for showing itself. There's a particular kind of courage this requires, and it's the opposite of the courage the culture usually celebrates. It's not the courage to conquer or to push through. It's the courage to be soft in a place where you learned to be armored. The courage to let your voice shake and not clear your throat and pretend it didn't. The courage to say, "I need you," to someone when every instinct you have is screaming that needing is dangerous. The courage to let someone watch your face while you tell them something true, and to not look away, and to not perform, and to let them see whatever they see. That's the bravest thing most people will ever do, and almost no one recognizes it as bravery because it happens in quiet rooms, between two people, in moments that leave no visible trace. Jung believed that this, the slow, private courage of letting yourself be known, was the actual work of becoming a whole person, and he had a name for the larger process it belonged to. He called it individuation, the lifelong movement toward becoming who you actually are, rather than who you learn to be. And love, real love, is both a product of that process and one of its most powerful engines. Because there's almost nothing that forces you to meet your own shadow faster than getting close to another human being. Every projection, every old wound, every disowned part comes rushing to the surface the moment real intimacy is on the table. Relationships are where the shadow shows up most reliably, which means they're also where the deepest healing becomes possible. If you're willing to see what they're showing you about yourself instead of blaming the person across from you. This reframes the whole purpose of love in a way that Jung found endlessly important. We tend to think a good relationship is one that makes us feel good, comfortable, validated, and there's truth in that. But Jung saw something more profound. A real relationship is one that helps you become whole, that keeps showing you the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, that keeps calling you toward integration, that won't let you hide because it keeps reflecting you back to yourself. Sometimes that feels good, and sometimes it feels like being turned inside out. But a love that only ever soothes you and never challenges you to grow is often just two personas keeping each other comfortable, two panes of glass agreeing never to break. The love that transforms you is the one brave enough to want the real you, even the parts that are hard, even the parts you can't stand yourself. And this is why Jung would say you have to learn this before anyone can truly love you. Because until you've begun to meet your own wholeness, you'll keep unconsciously arranging your relationships to protect the persona and hide the shadow. You'll choose partners who don't ask too much, who don't see too deeply, who let you stay behind the glass. Or you'll choose partners you can project onto endlessly, so you never have to see them or be seen. And you'll do this without knowing you're doing it, and you'll keep ending up in the same lonely place, wondering why love never fills the emptiness, when the emptiness was never going to be filled from outside. It was a hole shaped exactly like the parts of yourself you exiled. And the only thing that fits that shape is you, coming home to yourself. That's the part that's genuinely hard to accept, because it means the search you've been on, the search for the person who'll finally make you feel whole, was pointed in the wrong direction the whole time. No one out there can give you the wholeness you can only build by turning inward and reclaiming what you abandoned. A partner can't love you into being whole if you're still hiding the parts that need loving. They can only love what you show them. And when you show them the whole thing and let them love that, then the love finally does what you always wanted it to do. It reaches you, all of you, including the parts that spent your whole life certain they'd die alone in the dark. I want to describe what the other side of this looks like, because it's easy to hear all of this as another burden, another impossible standard, one more thing you're failing at. It's not meant that way. The other side of this work is not some perfect, enlightened state where you never feel insecure and love flows effortlessly. The other side is more ordinary and more precious than that. It's being able to sit across from someone and let them see you have a bad day without immediately performing okayness. It's being able to say, "That hurt me," without a script and without armor. It's being able to receive a compliment and actually feel it land instead of deflecting it off the glass. It's small, it's daily, and it's the difference between a life spent aching to be seen and a life where, at least sometimes, in at least a few precious relationships, you actually are. And you don't have to do it all at once. That's the thing I most want you to hear. You don't have to tear down the whole persona tomorrow and expose every hidden part to everyone in your life. That would be overwhelming and unwise. You start small. You show one true thing to one safe person. You let one small piece of the real you into the room, and you watch what happens. And when it goes okay, when the person doesn't recoil, when the love reaches through, you learn something your body needed to learn, which is that being seen doesn't always end in abandonment. And then you do it again, a little bigger. The glass comes down one honest moment at a time, over years, in relationships where it's earned and safe. It's not a leap. It's 1,000 small steps back toward yourself and toward each other. Jung spent the second half of his life convinced that this was the most important work a person could do, and that almost no one did it, because it asks you to give up the thing that got you this far. The persona kept you safe. Facing the shadow feels like walking into the exact danger you organized your whole life to avoid, and yet he was certain, based on everything he'd witnessed, that it was worth it. That a life spent fully known, even by only a few people, even at the cost of the many who only wanted the mask, was worth infinitely more than a life spent adored as a stranger. Because the ache of being unseen doesn't go away on its own. It waits. It gets louder in the quiet moments, at the end of the day, in the second half of life. And the only thing that ever quiets it is the experience of being met once as who you really are. So here's where all of this leaves you. If you felt throughout your life that love never quite reaches you, that you're surrounded by people who care and still somehow starving, then the answer isn't to find someone who loves you harder. It's to become someone who can be found. To turn toward the parts of yourself you exiled, to meet the frightened, angry, hungry, needy pieces you locked in the dark, and to slowly, gently bring them back into the light. Because they're not the reason you're unlovable. They're the parts of you that have been waiting your whole life to be loved, starting with you. And the strange, beautiful order of it is this. The more of yourself you're able to hold, the more of yourself you're able to let others hold. You become lovable in exactly the measure that you become knowable, and you become knowable in exactly the measure that you're willing to know yourself. The glass between you and everyone who's ever tried to reach you is the same glass between you and yourself, and it comes down from the inside. No one out there can break it for you, no matter how much they love you, because they can't even see it, and they can't reach the part of you that built it. Only you can go into that room. Only you can unlock the door. And when you do, when you finally stand in your own life without the mask, without the glass, without the frantic editing and performing and hiding, you'll discover that the love you thought you had to earn was never the thing you needed. What you needed was to stop hiding from the one person who could let the love in, yourself. That's the thing Jung says you have to learn. Not how to be lovable, how to be known. And the day you stop performing the self you thought you had to be, and let someone see the self you actually are, and they stay, that's the day you finally understand that no one could love you before, not because you weren't worth loving, but because you were never quite there to be loved. And now you are. Standing in the room with the light on, and the door finally open, and nothing between you and the world but the ordinary, terrifying, miraculous fact of being seen. You've spent long enough behind the glass. The real you has been waiting in that room the whole time, patient and quiet, hoping you'd come back. It's not too late. It's never too late. That part of you doesn't hold grudges. It just wants to be let out into the light, and it will meet you the moment you're willing to turn and look. And once you've met yourself there, in that room you spent your whole life avoiding, you'll find that the thing you always wanted was never on the other side of some perfect person's love. It was on the other side of your own willingness to be found. If you haven't yet, take a look at our guide, True Self-Discovery. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work, made for exactly this journey back toward the rooms you've kept locked and the self you've kept hidden. A way to begin meeting the parts of you that have been waiting in the dark, so that the love in your life can finally reach the person it was always meant for. The link is right below.